I spent a decent chunk of the end of January playing Palworld, not just because it's fun, which it is, but because of the huge conversation around it. It's a derivative game, for sure, but it does just enough with those copied components to have gripped me for a while. That was until Enshrouded launched just a week later and showed me exactly how I want games to explore concepts I already know. It's a repackaging with enough depth and heart to make me care about it now, months later, in a way I just couldn't with any survival crafter this year so far. It's very good, and you should play it. If you've managed to play Valheim, you probably have a good idea of how Enshrouded works. It's a multiplayer survival crafter that encourages you to commit to legacy playthroughs thanks to genuinely intriguing world building and story components. In a lot of ways, Enshrouded feels like you grabbed a bunch of concepts, threw them in a hat and picked a few out. It's the exact type of game you'd expect to launch on Steam, yet it's nowhere near as insufferable and soulless as that may make you think. It's one of the most approachable survival games I've played in years because it leads with that action RPG element. You aren't overly punished for your sense of adventure, and it is instead encouraged at every corner. I have no problem with being punished for playing games by its own rules. In fact, as you might be able to tell from my love of Souls-likes, I love when a game has an internal logic it beats into you. However, Enshrouded's approach to its world is downright enchanting thanks to the freedom offered to you. There aren't time limits, nothing is absolutely pressing. The world is gone and you have to slowly pull back a sanctuary for you and whoever remains. To put it simply, you awaken a world that has been lost to a great corruption. When enemies and fauna aren't threatening you, the Shroud is. The Shroud is a great fog that you can only spend minutes in at a time before you eventually get killed by it. At the start, this presence is incredibly menacing until you slowly push the perimeters of your base and start looking at life as a resource you can spend in between rests. This works to organically push you into being more bold and taking a few more steps past your point of comfort. Two things help this exploration along greatly. The first are quests that challenge you with finding NPCs and resources. These can add more actions to your base camp or allow you to upgrade the flame, keeping your camp alive. Essentially, you can choose to put down your base anywhere, and this gives you a square perimeter where you can access a building menu. With everything laid out on a grid, you can physically map out the perimeter with flooring to then build houses, shops, blacksmiths, kilns, and more. As well as allowing you to upgrade your gear, making your base bigger gives you more ways to protect yourself from enemies and more spaces to place NPCs. Said NPCs can give unique actions if you build the right type of house for them, so you're encouraged to constantly expand your little base of operations. Anything in the world can be carved into, which multiple times led me to dig straight into a mountain rather than risk falling into the Shroud below. This ability means you can terraform the space around your base and pump those resources back into it. It's a gripping gameplay loop that, while familiar, is incredibly satisfying. Exploring further outside your base will allow you to get upgrades quicker, but you don't hit a hard dead end when sticking to one area for too long. The NPCs not only give the buff of allowing to craft more gear, but it adds to that homely feel when creating your base. Base crafting is simple and effective, with a handful of major sections which control certain types of shapes. Rather than crafting entire houses, you put things together like Lego and just hope something isn't sticking out at a horrible angle. Some things feel just a little off sometimes, but that's part of the charm. It becomes easy to turn a base into your base. As well as making your base bigger, upgrading it can eventually let you build more than one, encouraging you to create a new outpost across the map to haul items between. It's not exactly a Strand type game, but still connects ideas in satisfying ways. The second major thing encouraging exploration is a glider you can build from the workbench. As long as you appropriately manage your stamina, you can use it to, as the name suggests, glide across vast regions and get into new areas quickly. This makes retrieving your gear after death much easier and can encourage you to head back to base, drop off precious loot, upgrade your gear and get back out there again. A double jump and grapple hook mechanic make more precise traversal when you don't want to just throw yourself off a building to fly. They're also used to explore the game's many dungeons and inside areas, making for fun Legend of Zelda style puzzle solves. As you continue to progress, you will find fast travel locations which allow you to zip in and out of an area as long as it's not in the Shroud. This is one of the many ways that Enshrouded encourages you to continue after dying. Death never feels intended to push you out of the game, just knock you back in line when you start to get a little cocky. I mentioned earlier on that Enshrouded is a very approachable game. It's important to note that there is a huge difference between approachable and easy. Enshrouded isn't easy. You can die quickly in the wrong area, getting caught in the Shroud wipes you out, and you lose your inventory when you die. This forces you to go back into that area you died in, or wait until you're strong enough to take it on. It will punish you for being too confident, but the glider, run speed, and variety of combat choices means that coming back isn't always about getting better gear and leveling up. Sometimes it's just about having the right approach. I honestly love the way the game constantly encourages you to just bash your head off the wall until you come crashing through the other side. A way it does this is through its combat. Enshrouded's fighting sort of reminds me of Outward, a brutal RPG from back in 2019. Gameplay is clunky, but in a way that feels intentional. You are constantly told to slow down and tackle enemies one by one, though the game tends to throw much more than one at you at a time. Your magic, which you can channel with wands, isn't a get out of jail free card, but it can be exploited to ping enemies for damage as you run away. Everything feels like it can be cheesed in subtle ways, but you are almost constantly rewarded for doing so. Just because there are clunky elements doesn't mean the gameplay can't also feel great. I felt equally likely to fall into a canyon or snipe the leader from afar. The game can feel a tad dull in just how it likes you to engage with combat, as many weapons and some enemies feel quite similar, but this is something I imagine being hammered out over the early access period. With most of your moment-to-moment combat being based on managing your stamina bar, there's a Souls-like feel here without the wonderful miasma of Miyazaki's mind peering into your soul. It's one of those games that lets you bend its rules, if you know what they are. Though enemies can start to become predictable, the game is scattered with bosses that can come thundering into areas or are used as a roadblock before you can activate the next part of the story. The game's combat mechanics often feel built in a way that doesn't lend itself to the most interesting boss fights, yet they remain exciting throughout. This is something I hope changes even more over the next year with special super leveled enemies and secrets. Visually, I quite like Enshrouded. There's a certain language to the aesthetics of the world that you learn as you go, signifying which enemies are scary, how far away from your camp you can get without worrying, and more. Unfortunately, the game's performance can be pretty poor. This is one of those things that is somewhat expected from a big early access title, but worth noting nonetheless. When I say Enshrouded is big, I really do mean it. The world itself is enormous and designed much closer to a traditional RPG than a survival crafter. Dungeons, bosses, and encampments have a level of intentionality to them that allows an interesting level of environmental storytelling. It's also just excellent if you want a world to spend 100 hours in. The soundtrack also works really well, capturing the strings and anthemic chords of a grand RPG. Track Embervale is bright yet mysterious, the perfect tune to make your way into that dark world. The Ancient Spires, on the other hand, is a winding melancholy, punctuated with sharp pipes and flutes. The songs aren't the most original conceptually, but are interesting and surprisingly gutting when taken in context. They lay a great foundation that a particularly heart-wrenching bit of lore can really latch onto. It's a soundtrack before it is songs, a sum of parts that builds into an enthralling atmosphere. The story itself is pretty bare bones, giving lots of room for you to almost tell yourself the story. If you want to dig a little deeper into the decayed world around you, you mostly have to do this through little bits of lore gleaned from notes left in houses and around the world. This means you can try to piece things together if you so choose, but also you can just get out there and start hitting stuff. This is a particularly good way to tell a story in a simultaneous multiplayer world, and it does it quite well. Though, unfortunately, the progress made outside of the base, like the mountain I cleared with a pickaxe, just seems to reset after logging out. This is a real shame, as I love the idea of environmental storytelling that you tell each other rather than from the world. Maybe this is just the video game narcissism of always having to be the main character speaking when I wish for the environment to stay the same, but that's sort of on Enshrouded for building you up as the de facto chosen one. Chests and encampments also refill after logging out though, building into that perceived approachability quite well. It's one of those games I wouldn't mind bullying a friend into playing with me, as I'm sure fun can be found, regardless of comfortability with survival games. Building mechanics are so strong that a dedicated builder will find a lot to do, and the world is just begging to be explored by those who like building less, thanks to a huge map, bosses, and so much more. Enshrouded suffers from its own ambition at points, where it adapts meaningfully onto the wider genre well, whilst also failing to jump over some near knee-high barriers. It scores from the halfway line, but misses open goals, or some metaphor I'm better equipped to make. It looks really great at points, but frame rates can be inconsistent. The building feels excellent, but inventory management could be smarter. The ability to build rooms for NPCs and get special mechanics is great, but the game doesn't always explain it to you. Frustratingly, all three of these problems play into some of the best parts of the game as well. Enshrouded is a game I'm looking forward to forgetting about. Not because it's bad in any way, but because I've mostly ran into the point where I'm willing to wait for the 1.0 release before committing all that time once more. I'm looking forward to some Friday a year down the line, realising this game I checked out a while back is finally finished, and convincing my friends to download it with me. So far, it's done what an early access title should. It's given me a tech demo for something that could be greater. Only that tech demo has also cost me tens of hours. Thank you so much for watching my video on Enshrouded. I'm really looking forward to doing more of these kind of indie spotlights and just random 10-15 minute videos about things that I've been playing recently. I have some really cool stuff in the works, and a fun little anniversary to celebrate this month in the gaming world. If you like what you've watched here, please do subscribe. It really helps. My goal right now is to hit 500 by the end of the year. Maybe that's a bit lofty, a goal for me, but I think it would be really cool to get one more. So if you liked, please do subscribe. Thanks for watching.